I'm going to bring up next our next presenter. She's a great friend of mine as well. She comes from the USF Health Byrd Alzheimer Institute. I'm going to get that right before the end of the day. She's the director of education there. Eileen has been part of her career as a passion of getting information out regarding this disease process so that we have more ability to deal with that. So if you give a very, very warm welcome for Miss Eileen Poiley. Thank you.
Good morning. Knowing how to effectively communicate and interact with a person with Alzheimer's disease is probably one of the most difficult challenges for both family and professional caregivers. I'm not on that mic, I can walk around. In order to effectively interact with a person with Alzheimer's disease and manage behaviors, you need to be able to understand two things. You need to understand what cognitive losses are that are associated with Alzheimer's disease, and you need to understand the concept of living in the Alzheimer's reality. Alzheimer's disease is more than just memory loss, and obviously this group knows that. But a lot of people, until they're faced with it, that's what some people think. But a person with Alzheimer's disease loses cognitive function as the disease progresses. Some of the more common cognitive functions that they lose include language skills, which includes both verbal, written, reading, writing, and comprehension, and word finding, short-term memory loss, difficulty carrying out tasks, problem solving, judgment, decision making, and personality changes. These are just some of the many of the cognitive losses that a person has. And I know it's often hard for caregivers to accept that their loved one is going through this and losing some of these cognitive functions. And the biggest problem we see is when a person with Alzheimer's has no other problems, they look fine. And other people will say, well, they look fine to me. So it's often hard to accept that there are these changes going on as a result of the loss of brain cells as the disease progresses. So what is meant by the concept of living in the Alzheimer's reality? And I want to really give you some really good examples of what this means and how the concept of living in their reality can really help you as a caregiver. First, I want to say most people, we take pride in the fact that we function based on honesty and facts. And that's something that we all do. And when your loved one has Alzheimer's disease, you've been married for 30, 40, 50 years. This is your parent your whole life, that you want to be honest. You want to be doing things based on the truth and facts. But with Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't always work quite that way. So I want to give you some examples. First, I want you to think of two realities. This is our reality, and this is the Alzheimer's reality. Because of those cognitive losses that I talked about, a person with Alzheimer's disease sees the world and comprehends the world differently. Because of their short-term memory, they may experience things differently. They're not obviously going to remember things. They're not going to be able to process the things that you do. So their reality is going to be different. So this is your reality, and this is the Alzheimer's reality. Our natural tendency is to always try and keep our loved one in our reality, hoping that we're going to preserve their abilities longer and making sure they are aware of what's going on. But what it does is actually the opposite. So an example, your loved one with Alzheimer's is still your parent, let's say, is still living alone and is still doing okay to live alone, but has definite symptoms and short-term memory loss. And you tell your mother, Mom, I'm going to pick you up next week and we're going to go to breakfast before we go to your doctor's appointment. How does that sound? Your mother agrees. You remind her again, And then the day before, you say, I'm going to be here tomorrow morning around 9 o'clock. I want you to be ready, and we're going to go out. You arrive the next morning at 9 o'clock. She's in her pajamas, and she said, what are you doing here? And the typical reaction is, okay, in your mother's reality, she does not have a clue why you're there and doesn't remember you saying anything. In your reality, you know you told her. So the first reaction most people will do is say, Mom, I told you last week that I was going to come over, pick you up, take you to breakfast. I even told you yesterday to be ready, and you're not ready. And her reaction's going to be, you did not. You never told me that. I didn't know you were coming over here. What we tend to do without realizing it is we have our reality and we have their reality. And we tend to try and pull them into our reality because we know our reality is based on truth and fact. But the Alzheimer's reality is their reality. And they live in that reality. They don't have the memory to know that, yes, you told them last week and yes, you told them before. They don't have that ability. So what happens when you try and bring them into your reality is you get them angry. You're arguing and you're trying to correct them, and it makes them angry. Another example is if you fed your loved one a meal, and then 2 hours later, they look at you and they say, when are we going to eat breakfast? We haven't even eaten. And what do? We tend to try and jog their memory by saying, don't you remember? We did eat. We were outside. We were on the porch. We were watching the next door neighbor's dog. And you try and jog their memory like you would a friend. But you can't do that with somebody with Alzheimer's disease. So again, you're living in your reality and you're trying to bring them all along with you. Rather than say to them, for the first example, let me go back. For the first example, when you arrive at your mother's and she obviously doesn't remember, instead of trying to jog her memory and remind her how many times you told her, just say when she says, what are you doing here? You never told me that we were going anywhere. Your reaction now is to go into her reality and say, you know what, Mom? I thought I told you, but you're right. I guess I forgot to tell you. But I was so excited when I woke up this morning and thought, what a great day to have breakfast with Mom. So here I am. Let's get dressed and go out. So now you are in her reality. In her reality, you didn't tell her in advance. You're here in the present, and that's where she's at. When it comes to the meals, if you notice 2 hours after the meal they forget, then it's very easy. Start giving them 3 small meals. So give them a meal. 2 hours later, when they look at you and say, we haven't eaten, you say, I'm so glad you said something. Let's go eat. So now you are joining their reality, how they are interpreting the situation, rather than trying to argue with them. When you argue with them, it doesn't help remind them. You're not going to jog their memory. You're not going to help them. What, in fact, you're going to do is make them angry. It reminds them of their deficit. It makes them agitated, it increases their stress, and it can create behaviors, or it can make behaviors worse. Your goal is to make them feel that their reality is fine and what they're thinking is correct, and this is the way we're going to do it. They're not going to be able to change. Another thing that you have to learn to live in their reality is also Alzheimer's individuals may have hallucinations or delusions. Hallucinations is when they see things, hear things, feel things that in their reality is very real. In our reality, we know it's not there, but in their reality, they may see it. So again, if you're sitting in a room with your loved one and they say, you know, I am so tired of all the noise of all these kids, it's just overwhelming. Rather than, again, bringing them into your reality and trying to give them the facts and say, oh no, there is nobody else here, just you and I. You don't have to worry, it's just us. There's no one here but us. All you're doing is, again, telling them what they see and what they think is wrong. You're not going to convince them. You're better off joining their reality and say, you know what? I don't like the noise either. How about if we go in the other room where it's quieter, and while you're relaxing, I'm going to come back and tell them it's time for them to leave. And literally move into a different room, come back later, and literally, come back in a minute or two later, and where your loved one can still hear you and say, okay, children, it's time for you to leave. We would like some quiet. Thank you very much. And you have them leave. And that way, you now are joining their reality. Your goal is not to argue. Your goal is not to remind them of their deficit. Nothing that you can do can jog their memory. So you have to really be aware that they will see things and hear things and think things differently. It's hard to accept, but sometimes your own interactions and the environment around can actually create behaviors. So by communicating to them and dealing with the behaviors and meeting them in the world that they're in keeps them calm. People have said to me, well, if they have no short-term memory, they're not going to remember that I argued with them this morning. Well, no, but I had a caregiver who actually told me by the end of the day, her mother was threatening her and was getting physical and violent with her, and she was absolutely devastated. I said, well, tell me your day. She said, well, in the morning, this is the one with the eating. She said, I would feed her breakfast at 8, and by 10, she was already asking, when's breakfast? We haven't eaten. And I would remind her, we ate breakfast a few hours ago, you asked for eggs, we ate outside, and I would remind her. This would happen again, we would have lunch at noon, and by 3 o'clock, she was already complaining that I haven't fed her, when are we going to eat? And this happened again after dinner. She said, then, at the end of the evening, it took me another half hour to 45 minutes to get her out of her clothes and into her bed clothes, her night clothes. I said, well, look what you're doing throughout the day. After every incident, your mother then forgets. She enjoys the moment. They thoroughly enjoy a moment, but that's it. They live in the moment. So they enjoyed breakfast, whatever you were doing in conversation and what you were looking at and what you were eating. Breakfast is over. That's done. They enjoyed it. They don't remember it. So 2 hours later, you're now arguing and trying to bring her into your reality. You're doing that again after lunch and again after dinner. And for those of you who are dealing with someone who has a lot of difficulties and who's progressing through it, you'll know that the Alzheimer's reality when it comes to clothing is comfy. Correct? I can't see if you're shaking your head, but yes, there we go, now I hear you. It's comfy. They don't have the same concept that we wear different clothes every day of the week. You wouldn't wear that same outfit the next day. You wouldn't wear what you wear during the day at night. If red is your favorite color, a person with Alzheimer's would be very happy wearing that red shirt over and over and over. I said, so why don't you try living the day in your mother's reality? Because you've sat there and disputed what she thought after every meal and kept telling her she was wrong and kept arguing and correcting her and trying to jog her memory of a memory she has no ability to retrieve because she didn't save it. And then before bed, you did the same thing. You tried to place your reality. Our reality is, I need to take off these day clothes and put on a different outfit for evening. That's not in the Alzheimer's reality. I said, why don't you live the day in your mother's reality? 6 small meals. So when she asks for lunch, and just say to her, great, I'm so glad you're asking, let's go eat. So you're never arguing, you're never correcting, and in the evening, let her sleep in what she's in. Pick your battles where they're worth picking, because you know as caregivers, dealing with someone with Alzheimer's and going through this journey with them is very stressful. Pick the battles that are worth picking. If it's not having anything to do with their health or their safety, and it's just a matter of what they're wearing, let them sleep in their clothes. If you know your mother happens to like purple, buy a whole purple wardrobe and let her wear purple. I tell caregivers, buy new outfits in double, so they can have one on and one can be in the wash. And change your reality to their reality. They're losing their ability to interact with the world in the same way that they used to, in the way you did. You need to sit back and say to yourself, what is my goal as a caregiver? My goal as a caregiver is to maximize whatever potential they have as they go through this disease. My goal as a caregiver is to maximize their quality of life. It's not to argue. It's not to remind them of their deficit. It's to validate them. It's to live in their world so they don't realize how they're progressing through this disease. And you'll find that, no, not every behavior, some patients will become agitated and will become aggressive. So not every single behavior can be prevented. However, the more communication skills you learn, the more you can prevent some behaviors, and the more you learn to live in their reality, you can at least minimize their behaviors, joining in with their hallucinations and delusions. And don't run for the first option for medication. It seems sometimes unusual to actually join their hallucination or their delusion, but it's always better to go with dealing with it behaviorally as opposed to using medication, because the medications do have some side effects. You may want to talk to your doctor if the hallucination or delusions or paranoia are starting to affect their safety. They're having hallucinations of their mother calling them and they may be leaving to wander off. That's a safety issue. You know, if they're having hallucinations that someone's trying to hurt somebody, that's affecting their quality of life. If they're now paranoid that someone's poisoning them and they won't eat. So you want to look to see if the behaviors are causing problems for your loved one. Then you may want to talk to your doctor and see what advice your doctor can give you if medication is necessary. But effective communication skills, effective approaches to behavior, and really learning where your loved one is. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease. So as the disease progresses, you're going to have to learn where your loved one is and adjust your communication, adjust to what they can comprehend. And communication doesn't always have to be verbal. We think communication is always talking, but an Alzheimer's patient sometimes can just do well sitting and nonverbal communication, looking outside, enjoying nature, something like that, which is very calming and it's not overstimulating. The environment also plays a big role in behaviors, and you want an environment that is very easy for them to understand, not a lot of multiple things going on at once, and a very soothing environment, something that they can handle, and a lot of reassurance. Keep in mind, as the disease progresses, they don't always realize where they are they in the right place? They'll tell you, I want to go home because nothing looks familiar anymore. So offering reassurance throughout. Imagine going to a foreign country where no one speaks your language, where you're getting lost in a city, where you really can't communicate, you don't understand the menus, the tour. They're literally on vacation almost in a foreign city. They're not able to understand and communicate as well. So you want to make sure that the environment that they're in is as easy as it can be. And hopefully, as time goes, you'll be able to adapt to where they are. Obviously, nobody is perfect, and caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's is extremely stressful. And we know that sometimes it can be very, very frustrating to go along with what they're saying, answer the same question over and over again. We're not saying it's easy. Absolutely not easy. We commend you in what you're doing as caregivers. So those of you that are caregivers, if you could just raise your right hand and turn it around and pat yourself on the back. I've been working with caregivers for over 20-some years now, and I know the difficulties that you deal with. And I hope that I gave you some food for thought and some information on how to better communicate with your loved one and to understand and really stop and think where they are along the disease and the process of this disease, and how you can best enter their reality and maximize the quality of their life. I thank you very much.